The Supreme Court of Appeal has dismissed with costs former President Jacob Zuma's bid to have prosecutor Billy Downer recused from his corruption case. The Bloemfontein court found there is no reasonable prospect that the appeal will be successful. Zuma is accused of receiving kickbacks to help his co-accused, French arms deal company Thales, to secure lucrative defense contracts from government. Meanwhile, the National Prosecuting Authority says it's ready for trial.
11th of April, we will do all that is in our power as the prosecution to ensure that the trial resumes. Because remember, they've already pleaded to the charges. All that is left now is for the trial to proceed on the basis of a plea that has been entered by the accused, and for us to lead our witnesses who are ready to proceed and testify against the two accused.
Deputy President David Mabuza says government is actively implementing measures to improve the country's electricity shortage. The country has been battling with rolling power cuts for over a decade, which is in part to blame for slowing economic growth. Mabuza adds government will create a conducive environment to open the market to alternative power producers.
As government, we have created a regulatory environment that is very conducive to opening up the market for alternative power generation producers. Within the framework of the Integrated Resource Plan, alternative energy generation measures are being explored and implemented to augment electricity supply and improve the stability of the grid. In addition, the President announced the amendment of Schedule 2 of the Electricity Regulation Act of 2000, increasing the embedded generation threshold from 1 to 100 megawatts.
Well, let's take a look at the latest coming out of the Supreme Court of Appeal, as I mentioned earlier, which has dismissed with costs former President Jacob Zuma's bid to have prosecutor Billy Downer recused from his corruption case. The Bloemfontein court, there's no reasonable prospect that the appeal will be successful. We're joined by legal journalist Karyn Maughan on the story. Karyn, so the Supreme Court of Appeal effectively has not given any kind of way for the former president to have Billy Downer recused from his case. Is the Constitutional Court the next step?
Well, the former president can ask SCA President Mandisa Maya to reconsider the decision made by those two judges, which we know, for example, Public Protector Busisiwe Mkhwebane has done that unsuccessfully on at least 2 occasions with judgments, dismissals like she did not agree with. And then he can also attempt to appeal to the Constitutional Court. But that being said, it's highly unlikely that either legal strategy will succeed, because at the heart of the judgment, Judge Pitt Koen's judgment, is this argument that the state has also taken up, that all the complaints that Zuma is raising against Downer can be ventilated in the trial and can be dealt with in the trial. So his rights are not being violated in a substantive way that would, require any court to intervene at this point.
Are we likely then to see the trial finally get underway, Karyn?
Well, we know, Kathy, that the former president is applying for a postponement of the case against him on the 11th of April. He is saying that his lawyers were saying, well, they want this delay because they want the NPA to decide on whether or not there will be a criminal prosecution against Billy Downer for, amongst other things, providing public court documents to News 24 and various other counts that they've laid against him. And they've also said that, they might go to the Constitutional Court as part of the appeal process. But the NPA has said, we are opposing this. We don't think your appeal has any prospects of success. Judge Koen's ruling speaks for itself. And it's in the interest of the public and South Africans in general, not just the accused in this matter, that this case is finalized after, 15 years that it has been dragging on for. So what we are going to see is a very profound showdown between the state and Jacob Zuma on the 11th of April. And it's very likely, given Judge Pipkun's reasoning in dismissing the application for a special plea and dismissing Zuma's attempt to appeal that dismissal, that the judge is highly unlikely to grant that postponement. And Kathy, the question then becomes, well, what happens? Is Jacob Zuma actually going to submit himself to a criminal prosecution?
Karyn, let's talk about the fact that the SCA has dismissed today's matter with costs. We know that the former president's financial woes have been mounting.
Yes, we know, for example, Kathy, that the SCA, in fact, endorsed an order given by the Pretoria High Court several years ago where it said that Jacob Zuma was not entitled to public funding of his corruption trial defense costs, and actually ordered the State Attorney's Office to compile a full and comprehensive list of what had been spent by taxpayers on that litigation, and then to, quote-unquote, take all reasonable steps, including litigation, to recover that money. Now, the Office of the Solicitor General has reckoned that the amount due to the state is 18.2 million rand. And they are now intending to issue summons against Jacob Zuma for that money. There will then be basically a case to determine whether or not Zuma agrees with the amounts, whether he's contesting them. And once judgment is given in that particular matter, the state attorney can potentially attach his pension to recover those funds on behalf of the state. In addition to that, of course, we know that he has to pay in his personal capacity the cost of his failed litigation to stop the release of the state capture report by then Public Protector Thuli Madonsela. And of course, the litigants in that particular matter, which include the EFF and the DA, can then seek to recover those costs from him. So this cost order being given against him in the SCA is just one in a long line of very worrying legal bills that he has to face at a time where he's looking at the prospect of a very expensive corruption trial that would require in the region of, if we look at Jackie Selebi's case, at least 16 million rand in funding to mount a proper defense.
So Karyn, all of these issues kind of conflate and it becomes somewhat of a melting pot. I mean, are we likely to see a situation here where, especially because of how public he has been about his financial challenges, where that becomes possible ground for the former president to say, but, I need a bit more time to put my finances together so that I can keep my legal defense going?
I mean, I think that's a very important and interesting question because, as you and I both know, under the parameters of the law, he wouldn't qualify for legal aid representation. And does he then represent himself in this case if the lawyers just say, look, we're not prepared to continue representing him? That, of course, would result in a potential delay. The other issue, of course, being his state of health. We know that was the cause of delays in the case last year. So that is an issue. But the more concerning issue is that given the former president's decision to, for example, walk out of the state capture inquiry when it refused his application when DCJ, Raymond Zondo, as he then was, refused the application for him to recuse himself, and of course the subsequent refusal to honor the Constitutional Court's order that he appear before the Zondo inquiry. Is there a distinct possibility that if he's ordered to face trial despite all of his objections, that we then see a standoff and a potential walkout? And what will the consequences of that be?
All right. Well, we're certainly going to have to wait and see how it unfolds. Karyn, before I let you go on a separate issue, of course, we have the announcement of Advocate Kashini Pillay to the Judicial Service Commission. Anything you can tell us about that?
Well, basically what happened was that Advocate Dali Mpofu was, of course, the representative on the JSC on behalf of Advocates for Transformation. He had served 2 consecutive 2-year terms, and as a consequence of an apt decision that was taken last year, they had decided that he needed, that more other advocates needed to be given an opportunity to represent that organization. We, of course, know that his representation of AFT at the JSC has been somewhat contentious, but they said that that had nothing to do with the decision to replace him. Kashini Pillay, a very well-known senior advocate and highly regarded on the bar, and she will, of course, be replacing Mpofu at next week's interviews for future Constitutional Court justices, which, as you and I both know, the last time the interviews, previous time that, one of the previous times that the interviews took place, those interviews very, very controversial and subsequently overturned following legal action. So we are looking at a very different JSC. Griffiths Madansela, one of the president's representatives, also being replaced. And we'll have to see, Kathy, if it makes a difference in the kind of tone and workings of the JSC when it concludes those interviews next week.